Are you coming to the tree where they strung up a man, the same murder three? Strange things that happen here, how stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree?
Welcome to Strange Things, broadcasting from the Arkanasa Radio Studios in Laredo, Texas. And welcome to the show. I'm Chris James, your host. If you were all enraptured in that last story about driving around the world in a vehicle, you can pick up the rest of the story at strangethings.podomatic.com or look us up on iTunes and Stitcher and a few dozen other locations. Tonight, we're going to be talking about the deep. Back in the 1800s, people knew the ocean was deep. If you couldn't see the bottom, you'd say it was deep. Humans, being the kind of people we are, someone had to ask, yes, but how deep is it? And this led to the next question. How do we find out? Any time a ship was entering an unknown harbor where there was a chance of running aground, a rowboat would be sent ahead with a crew to measure how deep the water was. A rope with a weight attached would be dropped into the water. The number of knots tied on the rope would be counted, telling the crew how deep the water was and whether it was safe for their ship to pass. If at sea, the sounding was taken by standing under the dolphin striker. That's the thing that sticks out the front of the ship. A leadsman, that's the guy doing the sounding, would drop the line down and call out how many marks he counted. Language being somewhat dynamic, words would change with the passage of time. Mark 1 was common enough, but 2 became known as Twain. Mark Twain got his pen name from this. A sounding derives from the English word sund, meaning swimming, water, or sea. It is not related to the word sound in the sense of noise or tones, but to sound a geographical term. As shipping progressed, folks didn't want to have to take soundings all the time, so charts were issued with the depths marked on them. If the water was real deep, it was just left blank. So how deep is the water here where there's no mark? 1872, the English Navy sent the HMS Challenger out to measure the depths of the oceans. I can just imagine the crew as the ship set sail from England. We're going to measure the oceans. This sounds exciting. A year later, we're still measuring the oceans. Why? 3 years later, we're never going to finish. They didn't finish their mission until 1876. On 23rd of March, 1875, as the Challenger was moving along the east side of the Philippines, the leadsman threw the weight out, and he watched as it sank and it sank. They had to attach more line to the sounding device. It just kept going. The weight didn't stop until it hit 26,850 feet, over 5 miles down. Now, being the military, they had to take a second sounding to be sure, so the leadsman had to drag all that line in and drop it a second time. 5 miles of line. I'll bet there was a bit of excitement that day. In honor of the ship that discovered this nearly bottomless area of the ocean, It was named the Challenger Deep. The nearest island to the ship at the time was a small island named Mariana. The trench where the Challenger Deep is a part of is called the Mariana Trench. In 1899, Sir John Murray, a scientist aboard the converted collier, a collier delivered coal to ships at sea. The USS Nero recorded the depth of the Challenger Deep as 31,614 feet, or 5.98 miles, as close to 6 miles as you need to get. By this time, they were using a bit more sophisticated measuring equipment, so today this is the accepted depth. 6 miles down, where hardly anyone has ever visited. The scientists all say it was too deep to support life. There would be no oxygen or sunlight. Seeing as it was so deep, there was no way anyone could possibly dive down there and have a look. Auguste Antonio Picard was born on January 28, 1884, in Switzerland. He studied physics, but he was more interested in exploring and inventing. May 27, 1931, Auguste Picard and Paul Kipfer took off in a balloon from Augsburg, Germany, and reached a record altitude of 51,775 feet, or 9.8 miles straight up. They were riding inside an aluminum sphere about 6 feet across. It was pressurized so they could still breathe. In order to keep from bashing their skulls on the rounded ceiling, the men had wicker baskets lined with cloth as their crash helmets. The sphere ascended way too fast. It shot up 9 miles in just 30 minutes. As they went up, the air began to leak out. The men had to shove cotton soaked in Vaseline into the cracks to keep the oxygen in so they could survive. During the flight, Picard was able to gather substantial data on the upper atmosphere, as well as measure cosmic rays. He was hoping to prove one of Albert Einstein's theories. The balloon was designed to go up during the warm hours of the daylight and come back to Earth as the air cooled at night. They descended back to Earth that night, landing on a glacier in Austria. There was less than an hour of oxygen left in their capsule. Now, we all know what goes up must come down. Picard got to thinking. Could the sphere be used to explore the bottom of the ocean? More specifically, the deepest part of the ocean, the Challenger Deep. And what goes down should come back up, hopefully. Picard got busy designing the bathyscaphe that one day might carry a man all the way to the deepest part of the world. The design was very complex, considering all the problems that had to be taken into consideration, as well as the unknown things that might come up in the future. The buoyancy would have to be accomplished without using air. Any air-filled chambers would collapse under the horrendous pressure so far down. What kind of pressure are we talking about? How about 16,000 pounds per square inch? That would crush a submarine in a matter of seconds. And with that, we are going to take a brief pause and play a couple of commercials, so don't go away. We'll be right back after this. You're listening to Arkanasa Radio. Do you have skin? Would you like to take better care of it? Call Lourdes James, independent beauty consultant, and set up an appointment. Call 723-3019. Coffee, nectar of the gods. And at the Organic Man Coffee Trike, you'll find coffee made the right way, one delicious cup at a time. Stop on by 4501 McPherson, Suite number 9. And remember, life is too short to drink bad coffee. If your vision isn't what it used to be, and you're not sure you're seeing Bigfoot or just your neighbor mowing his lawn, stop on by Del Norte Optical, 107 Calle del Norte, just across the street from the Embassy Suites. You should be able to see what you're looking at.
No, don't say goodbye. Stay with us. This is Arcanasa Radio. Quédate con nosotros. Estás escuchando Arcanasa Radio.
You're listening to Strange Things with Chris James. And welcome back to the show. We were just talking about that deep dive into the Challenger Deep. For buoyancy, the bathyscaphe would use 22,000 gallons of gasoline. Gasoline can't be squeezed by all the pressure, so it would maintain the integrity of the buoyancy chamber while still being lighter than water, so it would float to the surface. Ballast would come in the form of lead shot, which would be in 2 tanks with magnetic release mechanisms. The round lead balls would roll out the bottom of the tank, allowing the bathyscaphe to float back to the surface. Eventually, the bathyscaphe was built in Trieste, Italy. The bathyscaphe was then named the Trieste in honor of the place of construction. The submersible was 60 feet long, but it had a tiny sphere at the bottom for the occupants to ride in. The sphere was built in 3 sections. One big circular ring and a top and a bottom cap. It was a sphere, so the pressure would be pushing inwards at the same consistency all around. The sphere was 5 inches thick, and it had a tiny viewing port on one side. The entire vessel's design was over-engineered. No one wanted to send people to the bottom of the ocean, only to pull a squashed, flat, squishy mass back to shore. The Italian government sent the Trieste out on a few expeditions to look at the bottom of the Atlantic, but they lost interest in continuing, seeing as every time the Trieste left port, it cost a great deal of money and manpower. The Italian government finally sold the Trieste to the United States Navy. Well, the U.S. got busy making plans to do what the designer had intended for the submersible, send it to the bottom of the sea, the deepest place on Earth, the Challenger Deep. Originally, the Navy was going to send 2 officers down. The agreement signed when the U.S. took possession of the Trieste stated a member of the family was to go along when the big day came. So, Jacques Piccard, the son of the inventor Auguste, was to be one of the hopefully lucky men to travel 6 miles straight down. On January 23, 1960, the Trieste sank beneath the waves on its way to the bottom. As the Trieste sank towards the bottom, their radio stopped working. They no longer could communicate with the surface. After passing 30,000 feet, one of the outer plexiglass window panes cracked, shaking the entire vessel. Inside the tiny sphere, it sounded like a gunshot. The two men must have had a few seconds thinking the pressure had been too much, and they were both about to die. I hope no one had to use the bathroom because there was no place to go. They talked about whether to abort and pull the lever to drop weight or continue. They looked around the inside and they didn't see any water leaking in, so they decided to keep going. The descent to the ocean floor took 4 hours and 47 minutes. While on the bottom, Picard and Walsh observed a number of small sole and flounder, a fish that the experts had said couldn't possibly live so far from the sunlight. The fish were swimming about as if nothing was amiss. This would prove at least some vertebrate life can withstand the extreme pressures at the ocean's deepest point. They noted that the floor of the Challenger Deep consisted of diatomaceous ooze. This is what's left after all the little and big fish ate dinner and then used the bathroom, as well as all the things in the water that had broken down to their smallest consistency. While at the maximum depth, Picard and Walsh unexpectedly regained the ability to communicate with their support ship, the USS Wandonk. Using a sonar hydrophone, the voice communication system, the two men spent barely 20 minutes on the ocean floor. The temperature inside the cabin was 45 degrees at that time. Now, it's time to pull the lever and ascend to the surface. The Trieste had never been this deep before. No one had. There was a very real chance that the lever might not work. At such depths and with such cold water, the mechanism just might not work. There was only one way to find out. Pulling the lever, they sat and waited to see if the sub would lift off the bottom. The sub began to rise. It was no longer heavier than the water, so it rose at a good clip. They broke surface in 3 hours and 15 minutes. U.S. Navy Lieutenant Don Walsh and Swiss scientist Jacques Picard were the only people to venture to the bottom of the ocean until 2012. James Cameron, the guy who directed the movie Titanic, he manned the Deep Sea Challenger and he reached the seabed. He was piloting an experimental one-man submarine. Once he got to the bottom, he discovered he was unable to capture any photos due to the hydraulic fluid leak. The submersible was later donated to the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution. Lieutenant Walsh became Captain Walsh before he retired from the Navy. He lives in Oregon. Jacques Picard died November 1st, 2008. 12 men have walked on the moon. Just about everybody knows at least the first two, Armstrong and Aldrin. How many people have visited the bottom of our oceans? 3. And most folks don't even know who they are. The volcanoes that formed the Mariana Islands have some younger siblings. At the bottom of the ocean are a set of underwater volcanoes. Some of these volcanoes are busy spewing out poisonous gases like liquid carbon dioxide or sulfur dioxide. The water around these volcano vents is around 217 degrees, hot enough to cook dinner. Water boils at around 212 degrees, So this water is literally boiling hot. Fish and shrimp have been seen living in and around these vents. They have become adapted at breathing in this deadly chemical and somehow using them to survive. That, combined with living near a boiling hot geyser, these creatures are truly bizarre. That's a shrimp boil if I've ever heard of one. Food is hard to come by in the Mariana Trench. No land is close enough to supply small bits and pieces of vegetation that might drift down to the hungry sea creatures. Yet, somehow, a vast number of life forms call the trench home. In other parts of the ocean, there's a weird-looking Spanish dancer, nubibranch, that lives all over the world. They are marine gastropod mollusks that get rid of their shells once they're old enough to be out on their own. Their skin is multicolored, bright red, blues, and greens, and they swim by flexing their bodies back and forth, which, when seen, look just like the dresses worn by Spanish dancers. There are more than 3,000 known nubibranch species, and scientists estimate there are another 3,000 yet to be discovered. So-called Spanish dancers can be enormous, reaching 1.5 feet long. Most are the size of a finger. There are a few sharks that live at the very deepest parts of the ocean. They are identifiable by having an extra gill. Most sharks have 5 gills, but the deep dwellers have 6. This extra gill helps pull what little oxygen from the water there is. The Greenland shark is one. Now, people all thought these beasts as being somewhat non-aggressive. Jeremy Wade jumped in the water with one. Well, recent discoveries have shown a far more nasty disposition. They grow to over 21 feet long, which is longer than most cars today, and they've been known to attack anything in the water. They swim at a very slow, leisurely rate, looking like they have retired and have nowhere to go. In fact, they move slow due to living in freezing cold water. Their heart rate is slower than any animal near their size. This allows the Greenland shark to be one of the longest living creatures in the sea. The flesh of the Greenland shark is toxic because of the presence of high concentrations of trimethylene oxide. You have to cook the meat just right, and still there's a chance you'll get sick. Sled dogs have been known to become so intoxicated by the meat that they can't stand up. They look and act like they're drunk. The frilled shark is another 6-gilled shark. The frilled shark look more like an eel or a snake than a fish. They have a long, thin body with a head twice as wide. It resembles a rattlesnake's head. The mouth is filled with sets of teeth. As one tooth breaks off, a new one rotates into place. The teeth are sharp and they point backwards, making it impossible to escape once trapped in the mouth. They grow to be about 6 feet long, and their gills have a frilly appearance. This gives the shark a kind of a Victorian collar look around their necks. Unlike most sharks, the frilled shark's mouth is close to the end of its snout. This makes biting and holding on to things much easier. The black ghost shark is also known as the chimera. They live in temperate oceans down at the very bottom, around 8,500 feet. On very rare occasions, they have been seen in water as shallow as 700 feet. These sharks have long, thin bodies with skin like other sharks. Instead of bones, these creatures have cartilage. Sharks, unlike other fish, don't have skeletons. They range in color from black to light gray. What really makes these creatures unique is their reproductive organs stick out of the center of their forehead. This makes differentiating the boys from the girls very easy. Their skin is smooth and largely covered with placoid scales. For defense, the chimera has a venomous spine in front of the dorsal fin. The squid are cephalopods of the order Teuthidae, which comprises around 304 species. Like all other cephalopods, squid have a distinct head, bilateral symmetry, and a mantle. The squid, like cuttlefish, have 8 arms arranged in pairs and 2, usually much longer, tentacles. The squid are strong swimmers, and certain species can literally fly for short distances out of the water. Their brain encircles their throat. Any food passing into the stomach goes right through the middle of their brain. The giant squid has an eye as big as a dinner plate. They live at the very bottom of the ocean, and with no light to see by, they use their oversized optics to catch their prey. A squid only needs to mate one time. The female stores the sperm inside specially designed pouches so it can fertilize its eggs anytime it's convenient. It can suck up a huge quantity of water and then spray it out through a hole, rocketing away like a jet engine. And with that, we're going to take a brief pause so I can drink some coffee. So don't go away. We'll be right back after these messages. You're listening to Arkanasa Radio. Do you have skin? Would you like to take better care of it? Call Lourdes James, independent beauty consultant, and set up an appointment. Call 723-3019. Looking for a great cup of coffee, but you just don't know where to find one? Stop on by the Organic Man Coffee Trike, 4501 McPherson, Suite number 9. Tell Julio or Marta you want some of the best coffee on earth. Remember, life is too short to drink bad coffee. 4501 McPherson, Suite number 9. Did you go out UFO hunting and couldn't focus on the sky? You need to go to Del Norte Optical at 107 Calle del Norte and go have your vision fixed. That's not a UFO, that's a weather balloon.
No, don't say goodbye. Stay with us. This is Arkanasa Radio. Quédate con nosotros. Estás escuchando Arkanasa Radio.
You're listening to Strange Things with Chris James. And welcome back to the show. We were just talking about the strange creatures living on the bottom of the ocean, such as the squid. They come in all sizes, from tiny little squid no bigger than your finger, to the colossal squid that is said to measure 60 feet. There are reports of squid growing even longer, up to, say, 150 feet. But the scientific community refuses to believe such things could ever exist. There is proof of such giant living in the cold waters. It's just scientists have never actually seen any. Back in 1941, the German U-boats were living large and sinking as many ships as they could spot. Once a convoy was located, submarines would sneak in and begin sinking as many ships as they had torpedoes for. In the middle of the Atlantic, there was no air cover and few warships to protect the convoys. When a ship was hit, the others would all scramble to get away as quickly as possible, leaving the survivors to fend for themselves. These attacks nearly always took place at night. General Sherman had said during the Civil War, "War is hell." A few cargo ships carried many lifeboats. Most had huge rafts instead. A 10-foot by 18-foot flotation device made from wooden planks and barrels. They were designed for men to climb up onto and sit for a few hours until help could arrive. The water was cold and dark, and help might not come for days. The men had managed to pull themselves up onto the life raft, and they sat and watched as their ship sank into the deep. The rest of the convoy was steaming away as fast as they could move. There were many U-boats to run from, and no one wanted to join the survivors of the last ship that was hit. The lieutenant looked at his half-drowned crew, and he got busy seeing to any injuries. There were 6 men besides himself, and he felt responsible to see them through this ordeal, being the only officer left from the original crew. They sat there and tried to think about home. The cold air was near freezing, and their clothing was wet. It was just a good thing they all had on wool. Wool will keep you somewhat warm, even when it's wet. As the sun came up, the men all scanned the horizon in hopes of rescue. The lieutenant looked at his men and thought, "Weren't there 6 men last night?" He asked and was told that, yes, there had been 6 men. One must have fallen asleep and rolled off of the raft. It didn't have any sides. It was just a flat deck that floated in the water. As the sun slipped across the sky without as much as a smoke trail showing the approach of a ship, the men prepared for another long, cold night. The lieutenant assigned 1 man to sit up each hour to watch over his fellows so nobody fell overboard again. In the middle of the night, everyone was awoken by the sounds of screaming. One of the men was being dragged backwards off the life raft. The man vanished beneath the waves, pulled down into the darkness by some unknown fiend. From that point on, the men assigned to guard duty was armed with a huge knife. It was all anyone could do to get any sleep, wondering what demon had grabbed their friend and pulled him away. If you're tired enough, you can sleep anywhere. The lieutenant awoke with a terrible pain in his leg. He looked down, and he saw a huge tentacle was wrapped around one leg, and it was dragging him towards the side of the raft. The other men all grabbed him and tried to hold on. The monster at the other end of that tentacle was winning. The man who had been on guard duty lunged forward with the knife, and he stabbed the monstrous tentacle. He plunged the knife into it several times before the thing released its hold and disappeared under the water. No one was able to sleep from that moment on. They all sat huddled together in the middle of the raft, watching in all directions at once for the monster's return. A destroyer spotted the life raft the next day and pulled the 5 remaining men on board. The survivors all told of the giant tentacle that had plucked men from the raft like an hors d'oeuvres from a tray. The sailors will hear these things and never bat an eye. They are a superstitious bunch and have seen things most would never believe. Once on shore back in England, the lieutenant reported to the command to give his report. He told how the ship was torpedoed and sank. He explained about the giant tentacle had taken his men. The high command didn't want to believe it. There's no such thing as a giant squid that can eat men. The lieutenant had 2 circular wounds on the leg that had been grabbed. They looked exactly like sucker marks found on whale every year. The experts all said he'd gotten these marks from debris during the sinking of the ship. You don't have to be told too many times to keep your mouth shut if you ever want to keep your job. So the lieutenant said the high command was probably right. I read this account in a book on giant sea monsters I used to have. Alas, I no longer have the book, so I can't give any names or dates. Back in school, I was always fascinated by anything bizarre, just like today. We took a long drive to the Chicago Field Museum one time, and I saw a replica of a giant squid mounted on the wall. I read the plaque telling what this nasty-looking creature was and decided back then to avoid ever going in the ocean. Back at school, I told all about the giant on display and how it could grab a person with those long arms. My teacher told me, and everybody else, there was no such thing as a giant squid, and I must have either been mistaken or I made the whole thing up. Gee, thanks. This was just another reason I lost interest in school at an early age. I wish I could go back to my old school and track the teacher down that made me feel like an idiot and show her the video of the giant squid seen off the coast of Japan. I guess it was just another example of someone who didn't believe it, and so therefore it wasn't real. The vampire squid can reach a maximum length of about a foot. It has the prerequisite number of arms, but the arms are all connected by a membrane that looks kind of like a bat's wings. When the vampire spots its prey, it swims over until it's right above its dinner. Then it descends down on top of the unsuspecting fish and enfolds it into its cloak. The fish is held tight inside a kind of a skin bag where the tentacles are used to pull the fish towards the beak, so the squid can consume its meal. The squid ranges in colors from black to bright red. They live at about 2,000 to 3,000 feet below the surface. The vampire squid body is covered in photophosphors, which give off bioluminescence. This flashing light in total darkness tends to disorient any predators trying to eat the squid. Its eyes glow red when hit with a light. They have fins on either side of their body, used to fly through the water. These fins serve as the adult's primary means of propulsion. Vampire squid fly through the water by flapping their fins. Their beak-like jaw are white. Within the webbing are 2 pouches where the tentacles are concealed. Now, the giant squid is a bizarre creature, but the octopus looks like something from another world. They have skin that can change color as they see fit, from red to yellow to black, to whatever their background looks like. They have a talent for camouflaging themselves so well their prey has no idea the octopus is there until it's too late. They can also make a pattern of color seem to race across their bodies, causing any predators to think the octopus is moving when it's actually sitting still. They have a beak like a parrot mounted right in the center of all those arms. The octopus can squeeze its entire body through any opening that the beak will fit through. The arms also work like legs. Should the octopus spot some tasty tidbit on land that it wants to eat, the octopus can race across the beach or rocks and grab its next meal. The lack of water isn't any kind of a barrier. Some scientists say the octopus looks like it shouldn't be here, like it's from another planet or something. These otherworldly creatures possess a very high intelligence. The scientists have tried things like putting food in a glass jar with a lid screwed on tight. The octopus would examine the jar. It would flip it around a few times. Then, as if understanding the workings of the lid, the octopus would unscrew the lid and remove the food. The strength in those arms is beyond imagining. I've seen an octopus attack and kill a shark twice its size. It would be like wrestling 4 men at one time. If during a fight one or more arms should be mangled or removed, the octopus will grow them back. There are no bones, only muscle. Unlike humans, octopus have closed a circulatory system, where the blood remains inside the blood vessels. Octopi have 3 hearts, a systemic heart that circulates blood around the body, and 2 brachial hearts that pump it through each of the 2 gills. The systemic heart is inactive when the animal is swimming, and thus it tires quickly and it prefers to crawl along the bottom of the ocean. Octopus blood contains the copper-rich protein hemocyanin to transport oxygen. Hemocyanin are proteins that transport oxygen throughout the body of some invertebrate animals. These metalloproteins contain 2 copper atoms that reversibly bind a single oxygen molecule. I found 2 different spellings for hemocyanins, so I'm not sure which one is correct. We'll use them both. Hemocyanins make the blood very viscous, and it requires considerable pressure to pump it around the body. An octopus's blood pressure can exceed 75 millimeters of mercury. In cold conditions with low oxygen levels, hemocyanins transport oxygen more efficiently than hemoglobin. The hemocyanin is dissolved in the plasma instead of being carried within the blood cells, and it gives the blood a bluish coloration. The weirdest looking octopus is the Dumbo. It has 2 fins that stick out and look just like an elephant's ears. The creature is round and bulbous, just like the cartoon character. The Dumbo lives at the very bottom of the ocean, thousands of feet down. They can get up to about 6 feet across, but they have tiny little arms. The legend of the Kraken might have been based on either the octopus or squid. Thanks to Hollywood, most people today think the Kraken is from Greek mythology, but it was the Norse who wrote about encounters with giant, multi-armed sea monsters. And with that, we're going to take a brief pause here, play a couple commercials, and drink some coffee. Don't go away. We'll be right back after this. You're listening to Arkanasa Radio. Do you have skin? Would you like to take better care of it? Call Lourdes James, independent beauty consultant, and set up an appointment. Call 723-3019. Back in 1776, one of our founding fathers said, "Give me coffee or give me death." And if that's how you feel about your coffee, you need to go buy the Organic Man Coffee Trike and have a cup of the best coffee on the world. 4501 McPherson, number 9. And remember, life is way too short for drinking bad coffee. Did you go out UFO hunting and couldn't focus on the sky? You need to go to Del Norte Optical at 107 Calle del Norte and go have your vision fixed. That's not a UFO, that's a weather balloon.
No, don't say goodbye. Stay with us. This is Arcanasa Radio. Quédate con nosotros. Estás escuchando Arcanasa Radio.
You're listening to Strange Things with Chris James. And welcome back. There is a creature that looks more like a plant than an animal living at the bottom of the oceans. The Venus flytrap sea anemone is a large sea anemone that specifically resembles a Venus flytrap. It closes its mouth lined with tentacles to capture prey or to protect itself. It is a deep-sea species. A sea anemone are a group of water-dwelling predator animals of the order Echinaria. Even though it's an animal, it looks like a plant. The mouth will be positioned to face the flow of the sea currents. As small fish come in contact with the tentacles that ring the mouth, venom is injected into the prey. Then the mouth will slam shut, trapping its meal inside. They live about 3,300 to 6,600 feet down in the ocean. They're not very big, so you don't have to worry about being eaten by one, but if you should find one washed up on the shore, be careful with it, because the tentacles can still give you a nasty sting. Not to be outdone, the jellyfish is another creature living in the oceans that looks like it should be someplace else. To begin with, jellyfish aren't fish. They have no bones. Instead, they are soft-bodied aquatic creatures that look an awful lot like ghosts. You can see right through them. The bell, or top of the jelly, is where all the guts are. There's a brain in there as well, but it's not very sophisticated. You'll never find a jellyfish solving the question of life, the universe, and everything anytime soon. Hanging down below, or streaming along behind the bell, are the arms or tentacles. This is a very dangerous part. There are hundreds of thousands of stinging cells that, when contacted, will make your life miserable. When these cells feel contact with anything, the pressure builds up rapidly to 2,000 pounds per square inch. Then the cell injects its venom. To talk about hurt, the longer you take to get rid of these stinging cells, the more intense the pain becomes. Some jellies have a toxin that can kill a man. Between 20 to 40 people a year die from jelly stings. The jellyfish look like it should be drifting through space or piloting a flying saucer. The lion's mane jellyfish grows to 7 feet across and has tentacles up to 121 feet long. The sting is very painful but not considered life-threatening. Should you be stung by this critter, use vinegar to deactivate the venom. The Portuguese man-of-war doesn't really belong in the jellyfish category. It's not one creature, but a collection of creatures all bonded together to work and live as one. The name Portuguese man-of-war is appropriate in that these creatures are sailing through the oceans, looking for food and mates, and all working towards the same goal. They're also called blue bottles. The different creatures making up the man of war are: polyp number 1 is the nemotophore, the floating part that you'll see sticking up from the water. This is the gas-filled bladder that the collective organism is named for. As it cruises through the water, it looks like an old warship with its sails aloft. Polyp number 2 is the dactylozoids. These are famous as well as infamous, the stinging tentacles. Their average length is about 30 feet long, but they have been found as long as 165 feet. Next, we have polyp number 3, the gastrozoids. These critters are in charge of digestion. They're a cluster of bag-like stomachs found underneath the floaty part. They break down food and then supply it to all the other members of the crew. Lastly, polyp number 4 is the gonozoids, the man of war's reproductive department. Now, that's their entire job, to reproduce. They slave away at mating and reproducing little man of war creatures. The Portuguese man of war is very dangerous. Those great long streaming tentacles carry a dangerous toxin that can kill a grown man. The man of war may be beautiful, but is also one of the deadliest jellyfish in the world. The sting leaves a welt like a whip mark, which can be very painful for several days. The venom can cause fever and shock, and may cause the heart or lungs to stop functioning. And this, of course, will lead to death. I read all about jellyfish and how the Portuguese man of war wasn't a jellyfish, but it was still one of the most deadly jellyfish on Earth. I sure wish scientists would make up their mind. Is Pluto a planet? Is the man of war a jellyfish or not? This is the most dangerous jellyfish in the world and one of the deadliest creatures on the planet as well. It is also known as the marine stinger. Since 1954, 5,568 people have died from the jellyfish impersonator. The man of war has 15 tentacles, each carrying around 500,000 tiny poisonous darts. Each dart could theoretically kill up to 60 people. It is a fast-acting toxin which causes cardiovascular arrest within a matter of minutes. The pain from the sting itself is incredibly intense and may cause death even before the venom does, as it can lead to shock. If miraculously you survive a sting from one of these non-jellies, you will be in extreme amount of pain for weeks following the encounter. There are a lot of varieties of box jellyfish, all of which can be found to be quite deadly. The box is called the world's most deadly jellyfish, and it is a jellyfish. They also have the most advanced nervous system of all of the jellies. Not that they can do your taxes or anything, but they do have a bit more thought process going on. According to the scientists, the box jelly is found mostly around Australia, but they have been seen in the Atlantic and Pacific, as well as the Mediterranean. So, once more, the scientists don't seem to have a handle on what they say as the area where you need to be careful. Even when dead, the jellyfish venom is still a problem. If you find a jellyfish washed up on the beach and pick it up, you'll get stung all over your hands and arms. Should you encounter a jellyfish and accidentally get stung, use vinegar to stop the stinging process. Yes, I said that twice, so remember it. In Australia, fatalities are most often related to the largest species of jellyfish, Crinoix flickeria. Researchers at the University of Hawaii Department of Tropical Medicine find the venom causes cells to become porous enough to allow potassium leakage, causing hyperkalemia, which can lead to cardiovascular collapse and death as quickly as within 2 to 5 minutes. Scientists have found the carnivorous coral living at the bottom of the ocean. Most coral obtains nutrients from photosynthesis by creating nutrients from sunlight. This is why coral must live in water shallow enough for light to reach them. The carnivorous coral lives way down where light never reaches. The coral has developed long, thin structures that look like a harp. These structures stand straight up like a fence. As fish come in contact with the fence, they become trapped in a network of tiny hooks, kind of like Velcro. The coral emits a goo that engulfs the fish, and then the coral slowly digests it. Jellyfish seem to be one of the coral's favorites, since they just drift along and they're easy to catch. For reproduction, the coral releases round spheres that drift away until they meet up with other spheres from other species. The fangtooth fish looks like something out of a horror movie. It has huge teeth that stick up and down. The mouth is nearly half of its body size. They live on the bottom of the ocean where there is no light. Their means of hunting is to swim around until they bump into something and then try to eat it. This must make mating a bit hard. The fish looks like a piranha on steroids. The fangtooth grow to about 6 inches, but being as we only explored 5% of the ocean's bottom, there just might be a few giants down there as well. The scientists all thought the anglerfish were all female. The question was, how did the species survive? Some species can change their gender as needed, but this didn't account for there being only female fish in this group. Literally, the scientific community was hunting for a male anglerfish. The anglerfish looks like a fangtooth fish, only with a tentacle sticking out from its forehead. The tentacle hangs down just in front of the mouth, and the very end of it glows in the dark. This works to attract prey, thinking they have found their next meal. The anglerfish comes equipped with fishing gear. Anglerfish are hard to find. There aren't a whole lot of them to begin with, and so the scientists were wondering how were they ever going to find a male. The female anglerfish is the second weirdest fish on the planet. The weirdest is the male. All the time, the scientists have been looking for the male and wondering why they could never find one. They had no idea the answer was right there in front of them. They just hadn't looked hard enough. All the female anglerfish had what scientists thought were parasites sticking to their bodies. Little bumps on the skin. When someone finally took a closer look, they found out these parasites were actually the male anglerfish. The male would burrow into the female's side, talk about being a pain in the side, and then stay there. The female would run around feeding, and the food would be passed on to the male through the bloodstream. The male would then mate with the female. The two were literally inseparable. They had become one. Those of you that have been listening for a few months, weeks, or years will be happy to know the book, Strange Things with Chris James, is coming along rather nicely. Hopefully I'll have it out someday soon. Just it takes a lot of time to write a book. If you enjoyed tonight's show, please tell your friends. Let them know we're out here. We're here every Saturday. If you'd like to hear more of the shows from the past, you can check us out at strangethings.podomatic.com. And if you'd like to talk to us, you can contact us at strangethings@arkanasa.com.
Are you coming to the tree where they strung up a man, they say murdered three? Strange things that happen here, no stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree.
As well as a two-way radio. The vehicle was lengthened by 3 feet, making it 18 feet long, and the fuel capacity was beefed up to 200 gallons. The vessel was christened the Half Safe, a jingle used by the Arid Deodorant Company, which went, "Don't be half safe, use Arid to be sure." An amphibious vehicle named after a deodorant. What could possibly go wrong? 1947, yes, the same year as the Roswell crash, Ben and Eleanor gave the Half Safe its first test run.
Are you coming?
The state. But first, before we get going, let's take a look at one of the most misunderstood ghost ship stories ever told. If you watched the series of movies called The Pirates of the Caribbean, Part 1 through, I don't know what they're up to now, 27, you'll have seen a character played by Bill Nighy, Davy Jones, captain of the Flying Dutchman. No. Davy Jones was not the captain of any ship, and definitely not the captain of that particular ghost ship. Davy Jones is the owner and proprietor of Davy Jones Locker, and is an idiom for the bottom of the sea. The state of death among drowning sailors and shipwrecks. It is used as a euphemism for drowning or shipwrecks in which the sailors and ship's remains are consigned to the bottom of the sea, as in to be sent to Davy Jones' locker. The earliest known reference to the negative connotation of Davy Jones occurred in the 4 Years' Voyage of Captain George Roberts by the author Daniel Defoe, published in 1726 in London. Not to be mistaken for William Defoe, the actor who played Count Orlok, who was pretending to be Max Schreck, who was playing Count Orlok in Shadow of the Vampire. If that was just a bit confusing, you need to see the movie. It is one of my favorites. The Flying Dutchman was not a pirate ship. It had nothing to do with pirates. The pirates of the area around the Caribbean were gone before the Dutchman made his voyage. Captain Heinrich van der Decken had managed to acquire his own ship by 1941 after years of working under other owners. His was one of the fastest ships on the ocean. It was said to be so fast it flew across the waves. Thus the name of Flying Dutchman. After marrying the woman of his dreams, he set out to the Far East in a bid to bring back spices and silks to earn enough money to buy his new wife a huge house. The 2-year trip was fraught with danger, from the pirates that plied the seas in and around the Mediterranean to the storms that rose up from the Southern Ocean. Captain van der Decken had made this trip on a few occasions, and he had always wished that the Dutch had put in a port at the far end of Africa, so ships caught in the sudden storms would have a place to escape to. The Southern Ocean has some of the most intense storms on record, and the only way to get from the Atlantic to the Indian Ocean was by way of this nasty storm-ravaged route, which took ships right past the Cape of Good Hope. The Cape got this name from sailors who just hoped and prayed they would make it around the end of Africa. The going was bad if you were sailing east, but west was a whole other problem. The winds and the currents were all going east. Cape Town wouldn't come into existence until 1652, 11 years after Vanderdecken had become a legend. Setting sail from Holland, Vanderdecken promised his wife he'd be back soon, with little difficulty. He didn't want his wife to worry. His wife, on the other hand, knew the perils of sea travel, and she began to worry before his sails were out of sight. The Flying Dutchman arrived in India with little trouble. The Cape had not been as bad as most times before. The Southern Ocean current flowed to the east and made sailing much easier when following the direction of the water. The plan was to spend a month or two purchasing goods to be transported to Holland and sold. As the owner and master of the ship, Vanderdecken was responsible for all of the business transactions. Meanwhile, back home in Holland, his wife was beside herself with worry. She fretted about what may have become of her husband. When no word of his arrival in India had come, she turned to other means of finding out. She found a slave who knew how to scry and put him to work.